Hi, everybody. It's May 13th, 2026, and I've been posting these videos for 2 years as a form of recovery for the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Karen, 64, with Down syndrome, be locked away by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government for 588 days. And then I believe that he was killed by the medical staff after he'd had a stroke. So they locked Paul away after I complained to the Burnaby police when I discovered in August of 2022 a secret and what I alleged to be a fraudulent and forged power of attorney the government created to give Paul the COVID-19 shot. They appointed my then 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario as Paul's guardian to take over all decisions pertaining to his care, even though she'd moved out when he was born. She'd never lived with him, only met him on a few occasions, didn't understand his speech or communication. So when I complained to the police, the group home told my sister she had to do something or they would evict him. And so what she did was she terminated I had an agreement with the government. I could visit Paul twice a week, once at the group home, once at my home. I've taken him to Newfoundland twice. I've taken him to Seattle. We used to go to the PNE every year. I was his last surviving family member and visitor, and he was my last surviving local family member. So by terminating my visits with him, they effectively locked him up in his group home with no visits from family members. So I did everything in my power I could think of to try and restore his visits. I was trained as a psychologist. I worked as a psychologist with the government with mentally handicapped adults. Then I went to law school as a single mother. Then I became a federal prosecutor for several years. And then I practiced family law for 23 years. So I tried everything I could think of to try and restore his visits. I tried to become his guardian, but I was not successful. On April 15th of 2024, I got a call from the nun's lawyer. She had two law firms working for her around the clock, one in Ontario, Charles Gibson, and Casey Deanshaw in Vancouver, with the firm Borden Ladner Gervais. I estimate the Catholic Church spent over $2 million on her legal representation to uphold her guardianship over Paul, which effectively kept him locked up. I tried everything I could think of to restore his visits, but I was not successful. So on April 15th of 2024, I got a phone call from the Vancouver lawyer saying that Paul had had a stroke, but that I could visit him in person. So they had cut off our in-person visits, I believe, so that I couldn't get an authentic sample of his signature, because the signature on the guardianship, on the power of attorney, was an obvious forgery. And I know that because the only word that Paul could print his first name, I taught him as a little girl. It took me about a year as a little girl to teach him Paul. So the reason they locked him away and didn't let us visit in person was so that I couldn't get a sample of his signature. But once he had a stroke, I guess they thought he couldn't sign anything, so there was no harm. So I was only allowed to visit him for 10 minutes per day. But when I saw him, he appeared to be recovering remarkably well. He sat up, he grabbed my hand and squeezed it so tight, I thought he was going to crush it when I said my name. He grabbed a book from my hands and turned the pages perfectly. He scanned the pictures in the book perfectly. So he appeared to be recovering remarkably well. And I just sat outside his room for 10 to 12 hours every day for the 10 days that he survived. On April 21st at 6:30, I got a telephone call from a staff sergeant at the Burnaby RCMP, and he interviewed me for about half an hour, and he informed me that the Burnaby RCMP had been ordered by their Ottawa Oversight Agency to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And I was thrilled. I thought, oh God, finally somebody's listening. This is a breakthrough. I was so happy. The sergeant emailed me a letter from the officer in charge for the Burnaby RCMP saying that they had been ordered to reopen the investigation. I went to court the next morning and asked the judge to suspend the nun's guardianship over Paul while the police investigation was ongoing. But we didn't get on. And when I got back to Paul's hospital room at Burnaby General, the nun said to me, she wouldn't look me in the eye. She was very shifty, and she wouldn't look me in the eye, and she just gritted her teeth and said through her teeth, "Say goodbye to Paul, he's dying." So she wouldn't let me get near his head, but he was very still. All his medical supports had been removed. He had been on an oxygen mask with a ventilator for the previous 10 days, but that had been removed. And he appeared to me to be dead. So I believe that she told his treating physician to do medical assistance in dying on him, to kill him, to sedate him to death, so, to thwart the RCMP investigation, because she thought if he's dead, the RCMP can't investigate. They can't do the investigation. And actually, she was right, because I never heard from the RCMP again after Paul died. The next morning, she emailed me, and she said in the email that Paul was dead, and she'd hold his body till 2:00, and I could come and visit. After Paul died, then the nun's lawyers, the Ottawa lawyer flew in from Ottawa, and the Vancouver lawyer took me to court for 4 days and had to, in an application to have me designated permanently for life, a vexatious litigant, which is a very rare and unusual designation that takes away all of my access, the normal access that any human being has to Canadian courts has been removed from me. The judge was a woman judge, Judith Hoffman, went on for 4 full days, even though I had 2 medical certificates. I had a heart attack in 2016, and I suffer from a potentially life-threatening cardiac condition. I'm in the middle of doing my 10,000 steps a day right now. But I showed the judge hearing this application to have me designated a vexatious litigant, the certificates from 2 doctors, my family doctor and my cardiologist, saying I couldn't be in court for more than 2 hours a day. But she said, she didn't say it, but she just ignored it. And later on, in her reasons for judgment designating me a vexatious litigant, she said the fact that I said I could take care of my brother meant that she didn't have to pay attention to the medical certificates, limiting my court appearances to 2 hours per day. So I tried to set aside that designation at the Court of Appeal. I was not successful, and I wasn't even granted permission to apply for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. So while all of this was going on, I wasn't really paying attention to the state to laws. I stopped practicing in 2016, and I wasn't really paying attention to the law in Canada. But I've since come to understand that the Supreme Court of Canada it didn't expand. It reversed its decision prohibiting euthanasia in Canada. There was a decision called Rodriguez, where a woman with multiple sclerosis applied to be killed by her doctor. And the Supreme Court of Canada said no, that was against the public interest. But then in February of 2015, 11 years ago, a group called Death with Dignity, which is a non-government organization that promotes killing of people, euthanasia by doctors. And they brought forward this woman named Kay Carter, who had spinal stenosis, which is a kind of fusion of the spine. And the Supreme Court of Canada anonymously and unanimously said that it wasn't fair to Kay Carter, even though was dead. She was long dead. She'd gone to Switzerland and been killed by a doctor in Switzerland. They changed the law. They reversed the murder provisions and said that it was okay for doctors to execute Canadians extrajudicially because it wasn't fair to Kay Carter, a woman who was already dead. But it wasn't fair to her to make her wait until she became terminally ill to be killed by a doctor, that she should be able to be killed at the taxpayer's expense. But what they did was they said that the government of Canada had 12 months to come up with a system to make sure that people were not unduly pressured or coerced into being killed by the government, to create a system of guardrails so that we wouldn't slide into a system where what has happened now, 45 people a day in Canada are killed by lethal injection as medical care. They call it medical assistance in dying, even though the word medical is from the Greek to heal. So it's a misrepresentation. You don't heal anyone by killing them, and no one can consent to being killed because we don't know what death is. Death is never, in the 40,000 years of human civilization, even Neanderthals didn't consider killing people to be medical care. So what I discovered, I wondered, well, how on earth did all this happen? How on earth did the worst offense in the Criminal Code of Canada suddenly become paid for? Extrajudicial execution of innocent, vulnerable people become allowed when it was a hanging offense only 26 years ago in Canada, that first-degree murder with intent, killing people with intent, was a hanging offense. And as a matter of fact, my grandfather was a lawyer and a judge. But when he was a lawyer, two of his clients were hanged, an Indigenous man and an immigrant from Sweden who didn't speak English very well, and was devastating to him to lose two clients to being hanged. But it was quite common. So how did we go from hanging being abolished to the government killing 45 innocent, vulnerable people a day extrajudicially with no judicial oversight at all? The decision is made. The judge, jury, and executioner is any doctor or any nurse. They don't need to know the person, and they don't need to have a specialty or any special understanding of the ailment that the person is complaining of. But what I discovered, which was shocking to me, is that the Supreme Court of Canada took this on themselves, and they did it anonymously. So usually court decisions are authored by a particular judge or several judges, and there might be dissenting judges, but no, all of them decided together, unanimously and anonymously. But the Chief Justice at that time was a woman who I've met, Beverly McLaughlin. She worked her way up from the Court of Appeal of British Columbia to being she was the architect of this decision. She was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada when this decision reversing the murder provisions, allowing for the extrajudicial execution of innocent, vulnerable Canadians. And what I discovered was that almost immediately after authoring this decision, she became an employee. She was a salaried employee of the Communist Party of China in Hong Kong on the Court of Appeal for 6 years, from 2018 till 2024. And she didn't change the law there to allow Hong Kong citizens to be executed extrajudicially as medical care. The law there is that it's still a capital offense. It's murder, punishable by death in Hong Kong. Euthanasia, for a doctor to kill a patient by lethal injection is murder. It's a capital offense. What I believe, and since that time, by Canada Day this year, 2026, Canada will have used taxpayer funds to pay for the extrajudicial execution of 100,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians, 96% of them white. And I don't have the data, but I assume it's 100% Canadian-born white citizens. It's a genocide. Canada seems to stumble from one genocide to the other. 100,000, 45 a day, 5 out of every 100 deaths in Canada, 7.5 out of every 100 deaths in Quebec are killed by a regular doctor or nurse with just a simple piece of paper that they sign. People that have changed their mind have been killed anyways. There was a woman recently who the witness said that he didn't believe that it was her decision, that she was being pressured by her husband. And they just scratched his name off the form, found another witness and killed her anyways. And last year, an 84-year-old woman with a sore back went into the Vancouver General asking for help. And they didn't even ask her what the problem was. A young female doctor walked up and said, "We've decided to offer you MAID." They use this evil euphemism, medical assistance in dying, which is it's a fraudulent misrepresentation because, as I said, the word medical has never been understood to mean killing anyone. Just because doctors and nurses do it doesn't make it medical. And I was just thinking today that I'm sitting here in Canada because of another genocide. The potato famine from 1845 until 1855 in Ireland, 1 million people died. Ireland's population was 8 million at that time, and 1 million people starved to death. My great-grandfather, William Cairns, was 10 years old during the potato famine, and it was not because the potato crop failed. It did fail, but they continued to ship out all other foodstuffs from Ireland while people were lying dead in the ditches. 1 million people. And my family on both sides, my grandfathers escaped from Ireland because of that genocide of the British government. And I believe Ireland is a free state today because of that genocide. And just one last thing that came up today that occurred to me is that people compare this genocide, this extrajudicial execution by lethal injection as medical care of adults in Canada is being compared to abortion. It is not abortion. These are persons. Since Roman times, the law has said that you become a person when you take your first breath, and with all the rights and dignity of a person. So this is the killing of persons as medical care, which is impossible. It's not medical care. It's a fraudulent misrepresentation of what it is. So do whatever you can, spread the word, and start by never using the government made-up propaganda, evil propaganda word, made. I hear even members of parliament saying made this, made that. No, don't use that word. We've got perfectly good words for what they're doing. It's murder, or it's killing, or it's euthanasia. But never use their made-up word. And this all happened under Justin Trudeau's watch. And it's being propagated by Mark Carney, himself an Irish citizen. He's actually an Irish citizen. He's an Irish citizen. He's got 31 different citizenships, 27 from the European Union because he's an Irish citizen, 4 from the United Kingdom, and 1 from Canada. And this horrible genocide of white Canadian-born citizens, which I believe is a direct result of communist Chinese interference in Canadian political affairs. The death of 100,000 people can be directly linked to that. And if you want to have a link, just look at Beverly McLaughlin, who was the architect of this scheme, going and working for the communist Chinese government in Hong Kong immediately after making this horrific decision, which I believe is an unlawful decision. And just like in the after the Nuremberg trials, if you follow, it was not ever considered a excuse to say that you're following orders, and it's not an excuse to all you doctors and nurses out there that are killing people. It's not an excuse to say that it's lawful. It's unlawful, and I've just told you why. Take care, everyone. I love you all.